Hi everyone, I think we're on air. Thank you for joining us for CNEN's first virtual symposium, Advances in Drug Discovery and Development. We're doing something a little different for this session. It's going to be a panel discussion that may be a little awkward. We're going to work it out with this technology between three veteran biotech editors. We're going to discuss the business of biotech. Mandy Jackson is the U.S. West Coast editor for Script Intelligence. She focuses on biotech and pharma, including financial, deal-making, and clinical trial news. She has been a business news reporter for 15 years and is based in San Diego. Luke Timmerman is a journalist specializing in biotechnology. He's currently working on a biography of DNA sequencing pioneer Lee Hood. Previously, he covered biotech at Xconomy, Bloomberg News, and the Seattle Times. And Matt Herper is a senior editor at Forbes, working in Earth Science. So we're just going to kick off now. I wanted to talk first a little bit about hype and reality and emerging technology. In the past year or two, we've seen some record-breaking first financing rounds and sizable licensing deals for companies with fairly early-stage technology. I'm thinking companies like Juno, Editas. If you looked at the Fierce 15 emerging company list yesterday, a lot of those fall into that category. It reminds me a little bit of the big ticket deals in RNAi from a few years ago, and I'm wondering if you guys had thoughts on whether this is another case we're going to see this kind of cycle of hype, disappointment, and then reality, or if this is something that you're feeling a little more encouraged by, things like CAR T cells and gene editing. So we're going to go first to Matt Herper. Matt?
Look, there's always a hype cycle. Things always fail before they succeed. That's just the way it is. But I mean, on the two examples you named, CART and CRISPR, chimeric antigen receptor T cells for fighting cancers, and CRISPR for modifying DNA in mammals and plants and just about anything you want. I really do think these are technologies that really do stand a good shot at changing the world. So I think, yes, there is a hype cycle, and look, there's a biotech boom on. We're certainly seeing there's certainly going to be a lot of drugs that look good in the heat of the moment that don't in the end, but I actually think the comparison to RNAi is apt. I mean, look, RNAi has done pretty well. It's moved pretty fast. If you compare RNAi to monoclonal antibody technology, we've moved a lot more quickly the second time around, and things may be even better with CART cells and CRISPR. Now with CART, I think it's going to take a considerable amount of time. You're going to get the first couple products for patients who are very sick, who have very particular blood cancers. We still haven't found our second antigen to target, so there's a lot of waiting, and we don't know how to deliver CRISPR to mammals yet as a medicine. So we're going to wait. But I think this is actually a much cooler moment than RNAi and stem cells were 10 years ago. So, and I'm going to pass to Mandy.
Hi. Yeah, I agree. I think there'll be a lot of disappointments. I mean, there always are. The data never come out exactly how you hope. But I think things like CAR T have a lot of promise, and the big issues will be probably figuring out the best way to produce them for mass market and getting reimbursement because they're new technology, and of course the toxicities. With CAR T especially, there are concerns about what kind of toxicities there might be, though they seem to resolve fairly quickly. So, reimbursement, manufacturing, those kind of things will be big hurdles just because they're new and different kinds of technology. So I'll pass it to Luke.
Yeah, I agree with what's been said already. We're in a hype cycle. We're in the exuberant phase right now with CAR T and CRISPR, but there is excitement there for a reason. And as what typically happens, the excitement is coming from scientists. They think about the possibilities of the things that we can do now that they couldn't do before or couldn't imagine doing. That is exciting. But a lot of these people, it's not their job, and they're not really trained to think about all the difficult steps that have to come next. It reminds me of, I once spoke to a commercialization official at a local university who told me that she ran into a scientist who was really excited about some new drug candidate he had and wanted some advice on how to go to the FDA. And he said, "Oh yeah, I'm going to do this dog experiment, and I'll just can I just call the FDA and get a meeting next week?" And of course, listeners in the pharmaceutical and biotech industry know that's not really how it works. Things take longer. There will be hurdles along the way. I can think, in particularly with the CAR Ts, there's been some concern with the cytokine storms, an excessive immune reaction that we'll have to keep an eye on. But definitely very exciting time with those two technologies and others too. And I guess I'll pass it back to Lisa.
Okay, great. Thanks, guys. So kind of a related question in a way, because we've been talking about CARTs. So cancer immunotherapy has been one of the most watched areas this year. This tends to be framed as a race for companies to get their checkpoint inhibitor to market first. But I'm wondering, do you see this as an area where there are going to be clear winners and losers? And I guess as a tangential question, is a big company that's not in cancer immunotherapy going to have trouble being a force in oncology in the next 5 or 10 years? So maybe we could go to Matt first.
Sure. First I actually want to respond to Luke and say the most optimistic numbers I've heard about CARTs have come not from some scientist or from Carl June or Phil Greenberg or one of the other Juno guys, but from Joe Jimenez at Novartis. So I'm not sure we can really lay this at the feet of the scientists who are all overexcited about this. But when it comes to immunotherapy in general, yes, there will be winners, but I think there will be a lot of them. I think, in cancer, I don't buy into the you have to be in immuno-oncology to be in oncology. You didn't have to sell Taxol when Taxol was the base for every chemotherapy in order to be in oncology. We're not going to throw out every tyrosine kinase inhibitor or anybody else in dense just because they don't have an immunotherapy in-house. That said, it's going to be a competitive advantage to be able to develop your own stuff internally and to have your own immuno-oncology product, and that's really kind of, I think as an industry, that's actually the industry's biggest problem. It shouldn't be easier to do everything in-house. There should be a better way to collaborate, and there just isn't. I do think that that there will be big winners, though. I mean, there are a lot of indications, but I don't think we'll be splitting in an indication between two different PD-1 inhibitors or two different checkpoint inhibitors. I just don't see that making a lot of sense. That's not the way any other oncology market has really worked out. So I guess we'll go to Luke. It's really worked out. So.
Yeah, I would agree that we're going to see, there's room for multiple entrants. There won't just be one or two dominant PD-1 inhibitors. If you look at the antibodies, Herceptin, how durable that market was and continues to be. There's in Gleevec, In the CML space, there have been others that have come in and done reasonably well. I would expect we'll see a similar kind of dynamic there. This isn't like, say, hepatitis C, where one drug comes along with a clearly superior value proposition. I'll pass that over to Mandy now.
Yeah, I think that it would be nice for everybody to have a really great immunotherapy drug, but I don't think it's necessary. And everybody keeps saying that they want to do combinations to really make PD-1s work better and other immunotherapies, or combine cancer vaccines with PD-1 inhibitors. So, you'll need to have targeted therapies in your pipeline still as well to do those combinations. And not a PD-1 isn't going to work for every single patient, as has been shown in studies. So, you'll need combinations, you'll need other options. Immunotherapies won't be the be-all, end-all, and targeted therapies still will have a big role.
Okay, thanks guys. So on a somewhat sticky subject, I think, of drug pricing, Gilead's hepatitis C drug Sovaldi has become the poster child for excessive drug pricing. And I'm wondering if you guys think that this is the right example for critics to be using in a discussion about drug prices. And so maybe we could go first to Mandy.
Yeah, I really don't feel like Sovaldi is a good target. It's a drug that works for almost all the patients that are treated. It cures patients. It's a one-time therapy once you're cured. Perhaps a better target would be cancer drugs that only add another month worth of survival compared to therapies that are already on the market, or reformulations of drugs that are already on the market just to make them slightly more convenient or something like that. So, I feel like there's a better target than Sovaldi, but Sovaldi just it came at the right time when everybody was getting more and more sensitive to drug pricing.
Okay, it looks like we're gonna go over to Matt next to talk about this.
Well, it's interesting. If you look at which drugs have historically gotten people upset about drug prices, it's never been the most expensive drug. It wasn't, back in the 90s, it wasn't Taxol. It was grandma can't afford her cholesterol or blood pressure medicines. That's always been, and that's always been the thing that drives arguments about drug prices. It's not, I've yet to see significant public furor about the prices of ultra-orphan drugs, even with the current price of Solaris for AHUS being somewhere up above $600,000 per patient per year. What Sovaldi is it's a lot more like the proton pump inhibitors were than it is like the high-priced cancer drugs. It's a huge amount of volume very suddenly, and it's hard for payers to deal with, and that causes a lot of reason for people to get upset about the high drug prices. But there's also something here that drug prices are higher than they used to be. Specialty prices are a lot higher than they were previously. We are basically moving to a model where you charge more for the drug and less, and give it to fewer people. And Sovaldi is still an example of that. So I'm not sure that, while I think in some ways it's a bad target because it's a really effective drug, for people who are complaining that, wait a second, when did the model become that you're selling something really expensive to a few people? I think for some people it may be a reasonable target or a reasonable place to realize that the world has changed, and that maybe there's some things about this new world that consumers or politicians don't like, and we'll need to figure out how to fix them without getting rid of pharmaceutical innovation. So I guess we'll go getting rid of pharmaceutical innovation. So.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. I think when people complain about drug prices, they should really focus on the most egregious examples, and not Sovaldi. Sovaldi is, as we all know, has a good cure rate over 90% and short duration of treatment. It's curing lots of people with a chronic disease. It's worth a lot. There are others out there like, I think of Questcor, is a company that recently got acquired by Mallinckrodt for, I think, $5.8 billion. And they have an old drug that's been refashioned, remarketed in some new off-label conditions, questionable medical benefit. Those are the kind of cases where the critics should focus their energy. I think that there are also examples where the industry has overreached, and I think of say the second drug that I mentioned earlier the CML space. I think you see in certain cancer indications second or third entrants to the market that are charging premium prices rather than just going for a slightly lower price than the innovator to try to make it up on volume or to take away market share. That would make a lot more sense. So I think you're going to see some pushback. One example there would be, say, Ariad's Iclusig, which is priced at a premium, slightly different patient population within CML, but still a little harder to justify. So I'll pass this over to Mandy. Do you want to take a shot at this?
Hi. Well, I agree with all that. I think Matt made a great point about it being about volume for Sovaldi, and there are a lot of patients that are being treated all at the same time, so it's a huge burden for the system. But hopefully, over time, that price will get worked out a little bit so that the system can bear it a little better.
Hi, Don. I think we wanted to pass to Matt. He had one follow-up point that he wanted to make.
Yeah, so I was obviously there are examples like Questcor that are obviously egregious, but I do think that aside from what from what we were talking about before about these prices being high, just because Sovaldi, by the metrics we've used in our industry, that it's the same rate per cure as the previous treatments, the same price per cure. It's not necessarily in a market where there's real competition or where buyers have the ability to push back. It's not necessarily going to be true that you're going to keep the cost per cure constant. I mean, we could all see that Gilead could make a lot of money if Sovaldi were a little bit cheaper. So for people who are going to say that drug costs could go down, it's also worth thinking about from an industry perspective that maybe they could. I happen to think that Sovaldi's got a pretty good argument for its price, and I also can't see anything in the healthcare system that we have that's going to push back on it. But there could be cases where, if we actually ever do fix some of the things that are wrong with our healthcare system, it might be that even though you've got the better treatment, even though you're curative, that you're not going to charge such a big premium over what came before. Just like when you introduce a much better iPhone, you sell it for about what you sold the last iPhone for. It's not we shouldn't take it as gospel that the price always goes up. Okay, and back to Luke. Okay, and back to Luke.
One thing that, building off what Matt said about the iPhone, one thing that puzzles me about this industry is how few companies who come out with, say, a roughly comparable drug offer it at a slightly lower price. So I think of one example being Regeneron. Came out with their drug for macular degeneration, lower price than Lucentis, has been quite successful. And you don't see that very often. It would make a lot of sense that companies would compete a little more on price. And I think hepatitis C would be one example. Maybe it's the Idenix drug that Merck just bought, or maybe another one of those hepatitis C drugs could conceivably get FDA approval. The AbbVie one, I don't think has gotten it yet. They could offer it for a similar effective drug for, say, 10% lower price. And that seems like they could be fairly successful, but you don't see companies do that. I wonder if Matt has anything more to add, or anybody else wants to jump in on that.
Okay, I'm just going to really quickly put the discussion on pause to remind anyone who's watching that in your lower left-hand corner here is a Q&A button that you can press, and we'll have some time at the end, which is coming up pretty quickly, to answer any questions that you have. So feel free to press the button and type in your question, and I will prioritize and try to get to all of them. I don't know if anyone had any more to say on Sovaldi, so I'm going to move on to the next question, which is kind of related. And that's just, you know, again, some of the most expensive drugs that we have out there are for ultra rare diseases. I think Matt alluded to this earlier. That dynamic has attracted a lot of players to this space, including, of course, most recently AbbVie with their acquisition of Shire. You know, of course, there's an inversion component to that, but let's just focus on the rare disease part for now. And I'm wondering if you guys think that the rare disease model is a sustainable one. You know, are we going to see fallout in this space? You know, how many of these rare disease drugs can the market support given the small audience and the high price? Are you seeing any models out there that you think are ones that could be successful models? So maybe we can go straight to Mandy on this one.
Well, I don't know if I have a comment on really successful models in this space because I think it's still being worked out. But this is an area where I get a lot of pushback when I question whether or not this is sustainable to have $400,000 a year drugs. The argument is always, well, it's such a small number of patients and these drugs can really help them when they have no other options. But when you have hundreds of these drugs coming to market over time, it's a cumulative effect, and you have to wonder about how the system's going to handle it. I mean, you know, we're all worried about Sovaldi coming in and treating tons of patients all at once. You know, when you add all of these rare drugs together, and they're hundreds of thousands of dollars a year, eventually it's going to add up to a lot of patients, and everybody's worried about the system being able to handle just one drug. So there's going to be pushback eventually, and I'm not saying that there will be severe reductions in rare disease therapies, but payers will push back, and companies are going to have to spend even more time than they do now, I'm sure, on justifying the price and the cost to the healthcare system and how much they do or don't reduce costs overall for that set of patients. So I'm going to pass it to Luke.
I just wanted to expand on what Mandy said there about the cumulative effect of having a whole lot of orphan drugs that are high priced. I think there is a cumulative effect to these things. They do add up in cost for insurers over time, even if they only see a few patients with each disease in their region or their whole coverage network. But as we all know, covering this industry, these things take a long time. So it sneaks up on the payers, it sneaks up on everybody. These markets aren't just like technology with that new Samsung phone that comes in and immediately corners the market, sells more than the iPhone in 1 year. If you are, say, Vertex, and you come up with this new drug for cystic fibrosis, Kalydeco, you know, eventually someone may come along and serve some of those, either compete with you or fill some of those other rare disease niches, but it just takes so long to go from the insight through the clinical trials and through the FDA approval process. I don't think that it's going to, I don't think we're going to wake up one day and the light will turn on for all the payers and they say, boy, we've got to do something to corral all these rare disease drugs. I think it will sneak up on people over time. So I'll pass it over to Matt next.
So I went and calculated at one point how much, if we treated all the rare diseases with ultra-orphan drugs, how much it would cost. And it was, I remember it being, it was in the trillions. It may have been bigger than the global drug market. It was a huge number. So obviously it's not sustainable forever. But right now we're in early days, and right now I think the fact that we're seeing so many entrants where they did not, where they're really just doing rediscovery, taking something, I mean, from Agirion all the way on to things like the price raise we just saw from Retrofin. So far, there doesn't seem to be a lot of insurer blowback for these. So I do think companies will be able to keep pushing the envelope. One thing I'd like to think about here, though, is that it's entirely possible for a drug, I mean, if we were living in a world of single payer, for a single payer, it's entirely possible for a drug that is high priced for a rare disease to be a better economic proposition, both in terms of years of life saved, averted disability, and just flat out cost savings than something, you know, common and expensive. I mean, if I give everybody PPIs and get rid of their heartburn, you know, that's great, but that can't really compare to treating a kid with muscular dystrophy, if you can actually get that to work, or Alexion's new drug for hypophosphatasia. Some of these kids are basically born without bones, and the drug makes them have bones. I mean, there is a level of how do you put a price on that? So I'm a little worried on the one hand that we've got a lot of companies pouring in and just assuming, well, I got a rare disease, so I'm going to charge $300K per patient, and that's the way it's going to be. I don't know how sustainable that is. But on the other hand, you know, an ultra-orphan drug can be worth it. It can be worth that high price. Where I often have trouble, I mean, thinking about this is, you know, you need your drug to sell to create the market and to justify it. But once you've got a really big success, like Solaris from Alexion, I mean, I do think it's fair to think about, well, if they're making a few billion at it now, well, then maybe the price is too high because they need a blockbuster, but how much of a blockbuster do you need? I mean, if we're using that thought that we're doing this to justify the market. But on the other hand, you know, some of these medicines may be justified simply on the basis of it's that expensive to treat some of these kids, and maybe some of the drugs are actually cost-saving. So a bit of a complicated answer, but I think that it will run out, and will run out for some players sooner than others. But we do have, you know, we've got a lot of time before that happens, especially in the U.S. Mandy?
Yeah, I just wanted to jump back in and say I agree it will be a cumulative effect, but I think it's one of those things where, like a lot of things in the industry, it will jump in and sneak up on everybody really fast, which Luke kind of alluded to as well. It'll take quite a while for that cumulative effect to build, but payers are looking at it. They are. You can't ignore the fact that payers are at least looking at the issue and are concerned about the cost of specialty medicines. So companies need to pay attention to that and not just assume that their orphan disease drug can get $500,000 a year. So, Lisa?
Okay, well, I think this is actually a good time to take a question that we got in from someone who's watching, who's at Weill Cornell Medical College, and this person wants to know, on drug pricing, what do you guys think of Retrofin's business model and the CEO's use of social media? I realize they're kind of a very individual case, but I would love it if you guys have any thoughts generally on how companies are using social media to connect to patients. So maybe we could kick it over to Matt first.
Well, I think Retrofin's still figuring out what their business model is as far as Retrofin goes. I think it's great that Martin's out there on social media. I thought his Reddit Q&A was great. I'm not sure that I feel that his decision to buy an inexpensive drug and jack up the price was necessarily great. Often in these cases, you kind of find yourself wondering if maybe it was right to raise the price, but maybe they did it too much. But as far as CEOs using social media in general, I think it's great when they're out there. As a journalist, I guess it's no wonder that I say that. But, you know, this morning we had Accorda make a big acquisition. It's really awesome that Ron's on Twitter and that his Twitter account is named Ron Cohn's Hair after the frequent jokes from ISI analyst Mark Schoenebaum that he's got the best hair in biotech. You know, I think it's really great that Richard Pops is out there. I think it's really helpful to have voices out there who are in the business making themselves heard, not just waiting for us to call them. And I think it's a really powerful thing for social media, and I think that everybody's lawyers who are resisting this should embrace it and let their CEOs tweet. And
okay, yeah, I would agree with Matt. I think Twitter has been really good for us in the news business. We get to banter with the executives from time to time, or investors, scientists. It's a great way for us to find sources and story ideas that we otherwise wouldn't. There's a whole group of people out there that we can now have dialogue with that we couldn't before. So in the case of an executive like Ron Cohen or Richard Pops, they have public relations people. They know how to find us, and we can talk to them pretty easily, or always could. But I really like how social media has democratized the communication, made it easier for us to speak with the knowledgeable postdoc in a lab somewhere, or an individual investor in the Midwest. So I'll pass that back to. Does Mandy have anything, or Lisa?
Yeah, I agree. I think Twitter's been really powerful for us, especially since we're writing about such complex science and complicated deals. It's a great place. Twitter especially is a great place for us to go and get feedback from other reporters or analysts, and sometimes it makes you think about something you haven't thought of yet. It allows not just reporters but investors to engage with CEOs about their companies and their drugs. And Martin Shkreli and I have probably slightly different views on rare drug pricing. We engaged a while back talking a little bit about that. he seemed to think that $500,000 a year for an orphan drug is not a problem, and I seem to think that eventually it would be a problem. So, we had a short back and forth about that, but it's not just me. Anybody can do it, and it really has democratized the spread of information in this space. So, Lisa, I'll pass it to you.
Am I on air now?
Hi, I think we lost Lisa, but she asked us to talk a little bit about how pharma is going outside for R&D for early projects, and I did have a couple of thoughts about that. I think all of us probably wrote recently about GlaxoSmithKline and Avalon Ventures and funding 2 companies recently from a partnership that they started, I guess, about a year or so ago to fund some companies together. They're small investments, $10 million each company, but it's enough to get them started, and they operate from Avalon's little incubator here in San Diego, and they have access to each other. The small companies can share information and give each other advice, and it's a great resource. And if drug candidates come out of that for GSK, then all the better. But it's a good way to show that they're interested in early R&D. Make a small investment, let somebody else do the work and the early work, and they can take it over and put their expertise in it in later stages. So those kind of things I think are good ideas. Johnson & Johnson does the same thing with its Janssen Labs that also got started here in San Diego, and I think it's been successful. The small companies that participate in it really like it. It's a beautiful lab space, and they get to share equipment, and they have access to employees at the Janssen offices next door. So, I think those are great efforts. There are a lot of incubators like that around the country, and especially here in California, several in the Bay Area. J&J has been spreading their model around the world, really. So it'll be interesting to see. I think it'll be a long time before we see how that pays off. But for a relatively small investment, it seems like a great idea to me. As far as academic partnerships, I think that's going to take even longer to see how that plays out and whether or not those investments end up being worth the money that's put into them. But it's a pretty small amount as well. So I'm not sure who I'm passing it to, but I think I'm passing it maybe to Luke.
Okay, yeah, so the question about models and who's doing well with external R&D, you could call it. I think Celgene has distinguished itself in this area for a few years now, putting together a really impressive group of partners. I think they're one of those rare big biotech or big pharma companies that doesn't suffer from the not invented here syndrome, and it has minimized the amount of bureaucracy, which has a tendency in large organizations to smother the bright and somewhat wild or quirky ideas that sometimes work. They have just a couple of guys, the head of R&D and the head of business development, who work well together and move quickly. So I'm surprised we don't see more companies try to imitate that model. There are a lot of them that just seem to be wedded to their standard deal templates, and it's hard for them to change. But I guess we'll see in the next couple of years how well Celgene picked its partners, and how well that's paying off for their shareholders. So that was it for me. Maybe does Matt have something to add on this?
Yeah, I mean, on the one hand, drugs that come from the outside aren't nearly as new as everybody makes them sound. I mean, Lyrica, one of Pfizer's bestsellers, came from outside. And if we look at Biogen right now and Tecfidera, that's a drug that was not invented here. I agree Celgene's been really good at not having not invented here syndrome, partly because the IMiDs were the only thing invented there. But and I do think I hear a lot from executives, well, the world is bigger than within our walls, so there must be more good ideas out there, and we should be neutral between them. And I think companies still haven't moved far enough to embracing that. But I also think, evaluating lots of ideas that are coming from outside your walls is actually harder than evaluating ideas that are inside your walls. And you can understand some of the reticence, especially with the crisis we've had in scientific publication and in the accuracy of scientific results. So, I think the answer to that is everybody's working really, really hard at it, and it's really, really difficult. And I am going to pass to Wendy, or I think I'm going to pass to Wendy.
Thank you guys for a great panel discussion. Unfortunately, Lisa had some technical difficulties, so I'm going to wrap up for her. We really appreciate you guys weighing in on the conversation, and we really appreciate the audience for tuning in. So be sure to check our agenda for some other great speakers we have coming up. And thanks again for coming. Thanks to all our sponsors, and have a good afternoon.